Hi, this is Ren.
This is KC.
And this is All Walks of Film. So we just watched First Reformed, a film written and directed by Paul Schrader, a screenwriter who's known to many, notable for Taxi Driver, Last Temptation of Christ, Raging Bull, Bringing Out the Dead. He's worked with Scorsese a lot.
Mishima story in 3 parts, right?
Yeah, 4 parts.
4 parts, sorry. So we just watched it, but we didn't talk about it at all?
Yeah, we saved it for the podcast, which I hope will be interesting. So...
Did you like it?
I liked it a lot.
Oh, okay.
This is a film that is very challenging. It's also a film that, on the surface level, seems like it's explaining everything, but there's a lot of subversion as well.
I have many thoughts about it. I'm not sure how I feel about it.
So
I think I like it. I also feel like maybe in 2 weeks I might not like it. I don't know yet.
So this film stars Ethan Hawke as a minister of a church that's more of a tourist spot than an actual church.
Yeah, the nickname is that he's the guy who works at the souvenir shop.
Yeah.
He spends most of his time giving lectures and kind of like, this was built in such and such year, and this is the history of this piece, and by the way, here's our stuff for sale. We only have small t-shirts, but the caps are one size fits all.
Yeah, and while you can tell that he is a deeply religious man, most of...
Deeply religious? I wouldn't say that spending most of your life in doubt of your religion is deeply religious.
Actually, I would say that anybody who doesn't spend most of their time in doubt isn't deeply religious. They're just going through the motions, which I would say most religious people are in the other camp.
That does actually make sense.
Yeah, anybody who has absolute confidence in their faith, I would say, is not religious. You know, they're going through the motions, but I doubt their faith. So I'm a PK. I'm a preacher's kid, which is not to say that I have some insight on this that other people don't. There was a period of time watching it where I felt like I was like, oh, well, this is similar to, some of the stuff with how the church is run and all that kind of stuff, where I was like, oh, yeah, this is familiar, but not really. This is more of a character study where, the clergy stuff is a huge part of it, but, it's a study of one person, but how one person relates to the entire world.
It's also very similar to Mother. It's very similar to Mother in that there's a lot of talk about environmentalism, and then the metaphor of the earth looking fine on the outside but being corrupted from within is being presented through a physical entity who is representing what Mother Earth is feeling and how she's withering away.
Though I can tell that Paul Schrader spent more than a weekend writing the script on this.
Okay, you say that like that's a put down against Mother.
No, it isn't.
Anyone could wish to come up with something that great in a weekend.
Yeah, well, Mother's dialogue, I would say, isn't its strong suit.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that either, for sure.
Yeah, Paul Schrader has a way with dialogue. Granted, this isn't his best work. I would still argue that Taxi Driver is my favorite of his works, but I did really enjoy this film.
It does. I didn't realize who was responsible for the movie, but it did cross my mind more than once. Hey, this movie's a lot like Taxi Driver. Hey, this movie's a lot like The Last Temptation of Christ. So it's got his flavor in it. And thinking that is only a compliment, by the way.
Yeah, which is an interesting thing to put out because sometimes the question of authorship, automatically goes to the director, though, going back and watching even his works with Scorsese now might give me another perspective on it and say that, maybe perhaps the real auteur of this piece is Paul Schrader. Mm-hmm. There's so much to unpack with this film. And yet, a lot of it stems from conversations that we have, about the world, about environmentalism, about the fears that we all face. I know some people are going to watch this film and feel that it's a little bit too preachy, which kind of makes me chuckle a little bit.
I see what you did there.
But I really think Ethan Hawke's character was kind of a fascinating character. I feel that we're at a bit of a disagreement here.
I don't feel like he's necessarily written that well. I feel like Ethan Hawke did a very, very good job with what he was given. And there are a lot of points in this movie that are, very shocking. Not necessarily the gory graphic parts, although, yes. But I think a big part of my problem with this movie is this is not a movie that's going to convince anybody on its subject matter, which is environmentalism. We are wrecking the planet. There is a scientific consensus, blah, blah, blah. The thesis of the movie is, will God forgive us for destroying his creation? And it's said out loud many times throughout the movie. There's a lot of talk about the specific politics of environmentalism, and I do mean the politics of environmentalism, which is all great, but it's not going to convince anybody who doesn't agree with that line of thinking, and I don't feel like it's intended to convince anybody, and I think that is a shame. It feels very much of and I know this is probably written before this, but it does feel very much the kind of commentary that is too prevalent in the era of Trump. And I know not everything has to be about Trump, but in this case, since 2015-16, when, there was kind of the primary going on the Democratic and Republican sides that were super fucked up, there's been a lot of inability to reach across to other people, and a lot of grandstanding, being on your little soapbox and yelling very intensely, sometimes truthfully and sometimes just out of pure emotion. And by truthfully, I mean factually. And I do feel like this was more along that line, but what are you going to do with it at the end of the day?
Well, contrary to what you say, I think that this movie is talking about how we think about these ideas all the time, and it's poisoning us. We're thinking about the earth, we're thinking about everything external, and we're also not paying attention to ourselves and how we affect the rest of the world. And it's poisoning our souls, which I think is sort of the thesis of the film. I mean...
It's not, but it's the more interesting of the supporting points.
We're at a disagreement.
Okay. I definitely agree the parts that are about that are the most interesting parts, especially because it is addressing the fact that these are very, very modern phenomena. And by modern phenomena, I don't mean that it hasn't been around for forever, but it's become a phenomenon in our current time. Because we are at a point where this is something that most people think about all the time and can't be disengaged from, because the environment is so prevalent. It's something we literally talk about every day. And it is kind of interesting taking this facet of human society that is dying out and trying to look at this social topic and issue that has been on the rise, and trying to work the two together to look at one another. And I think that the parts that are more about how this affects people in a specific, this affects your life microscopic scale is really interesting. They could have done a lot more to make that more emotionally engaging, though, because I do end up walking away from this movie feeling very cold. And I don't particularly like that about the movie.
I actually was really emotionally engaged with the movie, but a lot of it was, in dealing with these, grand religious philosophical ideas, much of which aren't explicitly stated, even though other explicit topics are discussed in the film. I think you're in the headspace of Michael, which I understand because that's sort of what the film
leads you. I feel a little offended. Wow. Okay.
But the Toller is also in the headspace of Michael, but I don't feel that the movie is necessarily trying to say that Michael's ideology is right.
I mean, more of what I had gotten out of it was that personal affection is something that's hindering humanity from moving forward.
One of the things that I thought was interesting was, Michael creates a suicide vest, and
allegedly,
we see it in his fucking house.
Yeah. Is he the one who pointed it out?
That's an interesting theory.
I'm sorry, this was something I was thinking about for a lot of the movie. The wife's the one who pulls out the suicide vest. The wife is the one who is, Tuller's, main gateway into Michael's head. She's, facilitating a lot of that conversation. And it did occur to me that Michael might not have committed suicide.
That Mary did.
Yeah.
All of that. That
Mary sent him a text after she shot Michael in the head in the middle of the forest. Because she seems very, I don't know how to say except for, she, over the course of several months, she seems very just a little dismissive of his suicide. She cries a couple of times, but a lot of the stuff she says is just well, he wasn't dangerous, and no, nothing bad was going to happen. There was nothing really to worry about. He just didn't want to live anymore. Isn't that weird? I want to live, but, he didn't, and it's
Everybody grieves differently.
No, everybody does grieve differently, but Michael didn't necessarily reach out for help in any particular way. His quote-unquote suicide note was a legal document that was the last will and testament that was typed on a computer.
You might be onto something.
I was getting a lot of hints that, Mary, the pregnant woman, was the corrupting influence throughout the film. That's kind of bringing a halt to real action and progress in humanity.
Yeah.
Especially the fact that she's pregnant, what's the big environmental hazard that human beings are imposing on the earth, overpopulation. She's kind of more inclined to be well, let's just live the way we want to live and kind of just be environmental activist kind of on the side gig kind of thing. It's specifically because of her that Michael doesn't take real action and cause a real protest. It's because of her that Tuller does not go through with his big public motion that could actually incite change or incident or news, and instead he does something else, let's put it that way, to remain a little ambiguous.
You think that was something that actually happened?
What?
The end sequence.
Not the kissing part.
Okay.
No.
All right, so let's get into it. Let's get into full spoilers.
Okay, so in the end, the shocking part is when he decides to go. He's gonna fulfill Michael's mission, and he wants to put on the suicide vest. He's gonna go directly up to the CEO of one of the top polluters in the country, who happens to be funding a church that he's affiliated with, and it's kind of one of those how do you say, one of those mega churches?
Yeah.
Where they have a TV station and their church is the size of like a small football stadium, and it's like really, really ritzy when really it shouldn't be.
A Joel Osteen type.
Yeah.
You know, not that far, but like...
It's not that far, but it is headed by a literal fat cat. Like,
Yeah, which is interestingly enough played by Cedric the Entertainer, which, bravo. Oh, you know, that was a great performance. I always think it's interesting when comedians play dead serious roles.
Like, really well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to be said about doing comedy actually requires a lot more dramatic acting than drama.
Yeah.
But in any case, he's going to make this big public statement by, martyr-suiciding himself in the middle of a church and killing this, bigwig polluter in order to make a political statement. But for better or worse, that is his plan. I'm not saying that's something to aspire to, but that's what he feels driven to do. But he sees Mary go into the church after he explicitly told her not to, and he freaks out, and he decides he can't do it. And he takes off the vest, and he takes off his robes, and he fishes out this barbed wire from a trash can that killed a squirrel in the middle of the night earlier in the movie, and he wraps it around himself in a very self-flagellating style, and dumps all his whiskey on the ground and fills his cup with Drano. And he's about to drink it, and Mary is in his house, and he drops the glass, and he goes to her, and they embrace, and they make out, and everything's spinning, and it stops. Mid-song, cut to black, lingering, and then roll credits.
I think he found his faith in that moment and died.
Found his faith in... Okay, I don't really agree with that. He definitely died. The makeout scene was pure fiction. It's definitely one of those trying to have your happy ending and sad ending Guillermo del Toro style, but not really pulling it off.
Or Taxi Driver.
Taxi Driver, the better ending, yeah. But I don't know if it's that he necessarily found his faith in the fantasy of making out with a woman.
Let's get into the the symbolism and stuff.
The pregnant Mary. Yeah,
well, I was actually going to go back a little bit with the self-flagellating with the barbed wire. It's very similar to the Crown of Thorns.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, very evocative of that. Yeah, it's not subtle, but like
it's religious symbolism. When is it ever subtle? There's not. It doesn't need to be subtle.
Right.
Subtlety sometimes is a little overrated. There's no problem with like using symbolism to say something that everyone will get. I don't necessarily view that as a downside.
The pouring of the Drano is sort of evocative of communion.
The blood of Christ.
Yeah. And
the pouring of the beverage the night before the death. Yes.
Yeah. But other than that, like I'm still trying to wrap my head around like what I see that like final moment meaning.
Well, I feel like from the perspective of the author, it's love getting in the way of achieving your mission. He was going to make a big political statement. He was going to cause real controversy, possibly bring about true change. Not really. You kill the CEO of a big polluted company, somebody else will take over and do the exact same thing, if not worse. There's always another one of him. But in his own eyes, his death would have meant something. He would have become a martyr in both a religious sense and a non-religious sense. He would have put himself out of his own physical misery. But instead, he puts himself through extreme physical torture and kills himself in a very sad, pathetic way that says nothing and kind of causes his entire death to be in vain. Because pretty lady entered the picture.
Or just like Michael.
pretty lady entered the picture.
Well, I'm saying, or just like Michael, where his death didn't really mean anything. He didn't do it.
When he intended it to mean something. That's what I'm saying
Right.
with, like, Mary's significance in the story.
Okay.
I'm not saying that Michael and Tuller trying to, suicide process themselves to death is a good thing or endorse that kind of action, but the movie is making it very clear that they are specifically attempting to do something that's going to say something to multiple people. And that kind of gets taken away from them somehow.
Might we call it some sort of divine intervention?
I would hesitate to go that far because divine intervention sounds like that's a good thing. I don't know that necessarily taking the purpose out of a suicide is a divine intervention.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure what Paul Schrader's faith is, and it could be a lot more. It could be a lot more ambiguous with his faith. Like, there's some people who, it's not about seeking answers. It's about asking questions. And, every person of faith wants to find meaning, purpose in their life,
or in their death.
Yeah. And I do think that's actually a really interesting thing to get on because there is kind of a split between Christians with some being more focused on the eternal, the stuff that you can't prove, the stuff, afterlife, and some, like in the here and now. And I think the movie does address, like, I don't think the movie is glorifying really any character. I think the movie is actually condemning every single character that is shown, including the main character, which, like, the main character is not supposed to be somebody you look up to. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think the reason why Paul Schrader chose to have a character like that is so that people of faith could look in on themselves
and on their institution
and see the problems that they are causing, but also the inaction that they do. Like, of course, one individual can't solve the problem of climate change. Mm-hmm. Which, like, him blowing himself up and, like, killing the CEO of, a giant manufacturing company that's abusive to the earth, that's just one company. That's not going to fix anything. That's going to be a blip. Like, that'll be a news story for, a couple days.
At best, if they don't try to cover up the circumstances surrounding his death.
Right.
I will say, in general, the movie is what I would describe in short as Dark Knighting done right. Where there's a lot of conversations that are heavy in philosophy and heavy in, like, facts and dialogue that are not expositional because they're not talking about the characters or the story. It's a lot of, like, fact-checking that we're not used to seeing in movies, but in the way that it's written into the story and the way that the actors can deliver it feels more like conversations people are actually having, and not like in The Dark Knight where it's like, it sounds like you just read your graduate thesis out loud.
Well,
and just put Joker and Batman above every other paragraph, Well,
while watching the film, I had this emotional turmoil, like, with that overwhelming information about climate change, because, like, that's not something that you can go home and say, oh, that's just a movie. That's really what's happening to the earth. Mm-hmm. And it's overwhelming. So, like, watching that, there was an overwhelming sense that I had. And, I could certainly understand how that could affect him. Though I did think it was kind of funny that whenever he's looking up information on the computer, like it's completely in the dark, like he's looking at porn.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of like the new era's version of porn is like, how is the world fucked up? It's kind of like Human Centipede 2, where, masturbating with sandpaper, sort of a mental phenomenon. I did not necessarily mean to correlate this movie with Human Centipede 2. It's just emotionally the first thing that came to mind.
Wow.
For the record, this movie is much better than Human Centipede 2, which I consider to be garbage drivel, but I will say a lot of their conversations, to me, I didn't necessarily find that overwhelming because, I'm exactly like these characters. This is what I do with my time. I'm looking up this exact same stuff. I'm more of just, nodding and snapping my fingers, just yes. Mentally. We're in a movie theater. I'm going to be polite, damn it. But,
the polar bear.
The polar bear was, the first sense of... The polar bear was too soon. I will admit, because he's sort of, introduced to a lot of this, environmental stuff, but he already had the polar bear. That's, a PD problem. Well,
but here's the thing, the polar bear is something that many of us are aware of, and it's so evocative. You just have that image, and it tells you so much about, what's going on.
Right.
It's kind of like the vulture and the starving kid. Just, one image can give you a profound understanding of a lot of things, which I think this movie does a lot of. A lot of it, even though there's a lot of dialogue going on, I think there's a lot with imagery.
Yeah, but the dialogue it's one of the best things about the movie. I will say, pretty much the entire film, though, can be boiled down to that scene in the diner.
With, where he's talking with the businessman and the preacher.
The preacher from the other church, yeah. That's another time that he delivers the thesis statement of, will God forgive us for destroying his creation? He's trying to bring up, facts and statistics this is not controversial, this is scientifically proven, there is a consensus, 97% of researchers who have looked into this all agree that climate change is man-made and it's imminent and it's dangerous and we have to take dramatic action, and he's talking to a brick wall. And, the guy's just wait a minute, no, that's political. It's that's not political, that's fact. This is not, controversial. And he's no,
to anybody...
it is political because when you talk about bringing about ecological change and environmentalism, you're talking about messing with the 1%ers and the people who are actually making money, and he talks about how, you need to follow the money and all this stuff, and getting upset about, some little no-name guy having a funeral that nobody saw and getting moved, oh, no, you can't do that. A lot of the government and the corporations trying to overstep the boundaries of personal freedom, to the point where I'm just kind of did you even need a whole movie outside of that scene? Just because it's, encapsulated so well. Not because the rest of the movie is bad. Just because, that's, a perfect short story. Right there. It's just that one scene. They have an ongoing joke about, really great short films in the middle of really terrible films. This was a really brilliant short film inside of, a pretty good longer film.
I don't know. I myself am really fascinated by... the inner turmoil, but also the idea of pollution is not only something that we're doing to the earth, it's something that we're doing to ourselves, the alcoholism, that's, evocative.
Yeah,
and especially
self-medicating with poison, yeah.
Yeah, and, what we do to the environment, is taking Tums or... What is
Pepto-Bismol.
it? Pepto-Bismol. Yeah, why did I say Tums? It's the same.
He was taking Tums at one point.
Okay, yeah, but it's
there is a point at the very first scene of the movie he is taking Tums.
But that company, having recycling is mixing Pepto-Bismol with hard alcohol.
Yeah.
You know, you're not fixing the problem at all.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, unfortunately, as much as people like to argue that recycling is good for the environment, it actually causes a lot more.
Recycling feels good, and it does very little else because, unfortunately, especially in America, I should say, there are places outside of America that have been working around this, but unfortunately, in America, our recycling system is doing more harm than good. It's kind of like Han Solo, where it's like, yes, it's making a lot of money, but is it making a profit yet? Not really.
Had to go there.
It's very similar, where on the outside it looks like it's doing well and that it's working, but when you really take it apart and look at the mechanics, you're like, oh shit, this is actually doing more harm than good. It's exactly like, you know, the latest Star Wars spin-off film. It's a great analogy.
Or L3 in the Millennium Falcon, stuck in the Millennium Falcon now.
But my problem with the movie is, going back to that diner scene, is that, you know, that scene kind of illustrates that people are frustrated with having these discussions with people who will just shut them down and turn them into a brick wall and just be like, no, we don't need to talk about politics. It's more complicated than that. And it's like, no, it's not. But there's no offered solution or no, like, thinking about what the solution is. It's just like, oh, aren't these people frustrating? Doesn't that suck? And it's like, yes, it does. What do we do about it?
But the problem is like, there are no clear answers on what to do about anything.
I know, that's why it would be great if we had a movie that could point us in a direction, maybe. As long as that's what they're talking about.
I don't think this movie wanted to do that, even though
It didn't want to do it, and that's my problem.
Well, even though the main character is a minister, I would say that there's a lot of aspects of this movie that aren't preachy, and I would say that that's a big thing.
I agree with that, but when you have something like, for example, Mother, which just came out, you know,
which
like
people
a year ago,
immediately
hated, I understand, but it was trying to be evocative. It tried to work on a lot of different levels, and more importantly, it tried to offer some constructive ideas for what to do. Whereas this movie just kind of curls up in desperation. It's like, I don't know, I give up, which is definitely relatable, but I don't know that that's necessarily that constructive.
Not every movie is a message.
But this movie was. This movie was very much
not
a
every
message movie.
not every movie is going to give you answers on like how to fix problems.
It doesn't need to be answers, but it could be an idea, for God's sakes. Like, as long as you are going to be a message movie and you are going to spout off all these facts and you are going to be very explicitly, textually about a specific problem, why can't we go forward with some more creative thinking about it? It felt very much just like a Bill Nye Saves the World episode, and we already have that one. Okay. I would like a movie that can go a little further.
Okay, that hurt a little bit because that show tries to be a science show and it's more identity politics
but it
and
is
all
very
this
much
kind of stuff,
asserting,
which is not
what I'm trying to say is that show and this movie are very much asserting that they are in the right, and what they are saying is right, and that's just the way it is, without actually opening a discussion, or, which, I mean, I don't know that we really need to open more discussions, but without giving something constructive, or a call to action, or like, it's definitely doing a, like, hey, don't do this. But I don't know that that's necessarily, like, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to take what I saw in that movie and apply it in my life, which is the point of talking to a minister, and to a certain extent, that's the point of going to see a movie sometimes. Sometimes, not always.
I mean, that's certainly one way to look at it.
Okay. And by all of this, I'm saying it's probably like a 4-star movie, not a 5-star movie. I'm not saying this is why this movie is trash.
Well, given the fact that Paul Schrader wrote Taxi Driver, which is one of my all-time favorite films, I think that one of the things that's a through line between these two films, and this film has, by many critical circuits, been compared to Taxi Driver. I think the film is more of a character study on trying to find purpose. Because, with Travis Bickle, he's angry at the world. Then he tries to go on that date with that woman. He just doesn't get it. And then, he becomes really angry and tries to, kill the politician that the woman was advocating for. And then he winds up, saving the little girl at the end.
It is really funny to me how the guy who made Taxi Driver in our current day of MGTOWs and incels can't make anything like Taxi Driver today.
Well, I would say that's partly because that movie was directed by Martin Scorsese and not Paul Schrader.
He wrote it, though.
Yeah, but there can be director influence and all that kind of stuff.
It was just a funny aside. I didn't mean to open up a whole thing about Taxi Driver.
Okay. I'm fascinated by this movie. I understand your frustrations with the movie, and I think it's to a point. Like, I know the movie...
It is to a point. It is very intentionally not trying to convince anybody of anything. And I don't know that I like that idea.
Well, there's a little series that's... No, I'm just kidding.
Go ahead.
I was going to say there's a little series out. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. I think it's a trilogy now. It might be a quadrilogy. But it's God's Not Dead. Those movies.
Go home. Go home.
I'm just kidding. But, that being said, yeah, it's frustrating to a point.
Yeah. I'm not saying that this movie isn't exactly what he intended it to be. I just have issue with that, despite liking it in many other ways. This feels very much like the time that we yelled back and forth about The Witch, when we both liked that movie. We just had different thoughts.
Yeah, that
doesn't
happens.
mean we have different feelings.
That happens sometimes, and it's interesting to have conversations with people who have different opinions than you. I'll bet slight different opinions. Mm-hmm. So, what do you guys think of First Reformed? Let us know in the comments below. Let us know if you had any other interpretations of the film. Thanks for listening.